You go into an art museum, and in front of you are 5 red squares. And 4 of them happen to be works of art, and one of them is just an ordinary piece of cardboard that's painted red. And the one red square's got the title, the Red Sea after the crossing of the Israelites. The other one is called Kierkegaard's Mood. The other one is called simply Red Square. The other one is called Untitled. And the last one is not a work of art at all, it's just a red square. But it's visually indistinguishable from all the other works of art, which are all visually indistinguishable from one another. But Danto says the way we interpret them would be very different. So, for example, if we looked at the red square that said, this is the Red Sea after the crossing of the Israelites, we would imagine a kind of weird kind of calm because it's the Red Sea's parted and the Israelites have passed through and the Egyptians have all been drowned. So there it's a kind of eerie calm, for example. Or is the red square that said, Kierkegaard's mood would be what kind of mood is going to be exemplified by the color red. A red square that was just untitled, we might then think had different kinds of aesthetic features. And so the question that Danto raises about the nature of art is essentially that there's certain things that art has perceptually, right? We can pick them out perceptually, but that doesn't seem to quite capture the essence of art, because also the red square that is not a work of art, that is just a red square, and that's visually completely indistinguishable from a work of art that is a red square, doesn't have any aesthetic properties at all, right? It's just a red square. So in virtue of what does one thing have aesthetic properties? And in fact, we've got 2 different things that look the same, but might have very different aesthetic properties. The work of art that says, this is the Red Sea after the crossing of the Israelites, has got different aesthetic properties from the work of art that says perhaps Kierkegaard's Mood or Red Square. And yet this seems to be a puzzle. It seems to be a puzzle, about the nature of art. What is essentially the difference between art and ordinary things? And in virtue of what do ordinary things get their aesthetic properties? So this is what the thought experiment is trying to highlight. Danto actually wants to say that this is not really different in principle for many other different kinds of philosophical problems. He thinks that the kind of appearance-reality distinction, if you like, crops up in many other philosophical issues. So, for example, in the philosophy of mind, we might want to say, look, there are 2 creatures who from the outside look absolutely identical. And they both engage in sets of actions or of activities. But if the one creature has a mind, then we want to say its actions are intentional. It has actions. It acts. Whereas if the other creature does not have a mind, we don't want to say that it acts. We want to say maybe that it exhibits behavior, but it doesn't act. There's no intentional action. But from the outside, we might not be able to tell the difference. So what's the difference between an action and an activity, for example? The same might be true of ethics. 2 people could engage in exactly the same behavior, which from the outside looks the same. One person could be engaging in an ethical act, and the other person might not be engaging in an ethical act. So Danto actually thinks that this is quite a common problem in philosophy, that the perceptual data are not sufficient to tell us very often what the nature of something is. But he thinks this is a particular problem in art, especially in modern art. He thinks this problem didn't really arise sort of before maybe, the 20th century, and with the rise of kind of pop art and Andy Warhol and a lot of perhaps also found art. Duchamp's snow shovel, for example, looks just like any other snow shovel. In fact, it was just like any other snow shovel before Duchamp put it in a museum and gave it a label in advance of a broken arm. So Danto then asks this question, which then prompts him to come up with a theory of art. But I think that philosophers for centuries have been interested in the nature of art. What is art? Is art something good? Is it bad? Why do we care about art? it has no functional value, or if it does, it's not valuable in virtue of the fact that it has functional value. So that's ultimately what the thought experiment is trying to highlight.